Got it. Okay, that's great. Now, something else that you speak about when it comes down to a person's, like personality, is that it's much more effective to change your environment than to change who you are, right? So, can you go a bit deeper on this and just tell us why is it really important to understand this?
Yeah, that's a big part of that is self-awareness and then understanding
Yeah,
how you connect and relate to your broader environment. So, like we've talked about, changing your personality is really, really tough. It can only
yeah,
happen in certain circumstances.
absolutely.
And other than, with some exceptions, it's hard to do. So looking at changing your environment, a good example of that might be a job, right? If you, especially say it's your first job and you think, I want to work in a startup, I want to work in a fast-paced culture, I want to make a whole bunch of money, I want it to be really exciting. And then you get into that job and you realize, okay, this is not
Hmm.
quite what I thought it would be. I need some more structure. I need some more order. I need someone to tell me what to do a bit more. And this is way too chaotic for me. It's especially if this is early in your career, you can figure stuff out, figure out what works for you, figure out what types of roles and environments are fit well with your personality. You might think, okay, I maybe need a different type of job. Now, that's not necessarily encouraging people to just, if a job isn't a perfect fit, immediately quit, try and find something else, keep jumping from job to job until you find the right
Yeah,
one.
yeah,
But to use that opportunity to think about what's working and what isn't working, and whether those are really core parts of your personality that are reasons that there's a huge mismatch, or if it's something that you can change, right? If it's like,
yeah.
are these skills that I can learn? Is this something that I can develop? Is it because I'm in an unfamiliar environment where I don't know anyone? Can I learn all this stuff? Or is it because I just need more structure? I'm a very conscientious person and I need an environment that is a better fit for that. So that's an example
Mm.
where this is your first job. You're not going to change your personality in the next 6 months. And if the same thing keeps happening, you're going to be absolutely miserable. So it may be
Yes.
better to look for a different type of job and a different environment. That doesn't mean you can't come back to that environment later, but figure out what is right for your situation right now.
God. Okay, yeah. So pretty much, like it comes down to, once again, you can't really change personality much, right? It stays quite stable over time. Again, as we talked about, like unless you have like a serious crazy life event that takes place, like there are
Mm.
like a few exceptions that can really impact it, right? But in general, it's quite stable over time. And
Yep.
because of that, it's much more effective to kind of, again, put yourself in environments where you can thrive based on your personality. And again, a lot of this tends to come down to trial and error, right? Especially, like when you're younger, this is really important to do because then you can gain more clarity on like what kind of a life you want to build as time goes on, right? So
Yep.
spinning off that, can you go through like the different types of personality prototypes that people might fall into? Again, obviously, we can't just put people into one box, but like in general, people have a certain energy to them, right? So can you go through like the various different types of personalities that people may have, and where would those personalities be the most effective? Because I think this is really important for people to understand, because it can give them more clarity, right? Like instead of wasting time trying things that are just not going to be in their benefit, if they have a certain idea of where to channel their type of personality, it can be really helpful.
Yeah, and we can kind of categorize these and structure them into
Yeah.
classifications and styles. So, I mean, one of the things that I've worked with is actually the kind of the subclinical personality disorders. So these are not like personality disorders that you diagnose someone with and say you need to go to treatment for this. These are general styles and patterns of personality that we're looking at. So we're not looking
Cool.
at the most extreme ends. We're looking at the kind of normal range of
Yeah.
kind of
Just like
normal
in
range of
general.
personality traits. Yeah, just in general.
Got
So
it.
we can kind of cluster them into three areas. The first kind of cluster A is usually used in kind of personality styles as things like kind of wary, solitary, unconventional styles. So these are people who are tend to be a bit different, eccentric sometimes, but that can be really useful when it's channeled effectively. So people who are, like to go off and work on their own, they're not great at taking feedback sometimes. They're kind of immune to external
Yeah.
advice or suggestions. Can be challenging in a general day-to-day team setting, but often we find people like that are really good in highly technical roles where they have the expertise, they have the knowledge, they know what they're doing, and if they have a really clear set of objectives or outcomes, they can mostly do that on their own. So that's one style. The other one is the kind of paranoid, or I've called it kind of wary personality style. So people that
Okay.
are suspicious and constantly looking for people who are untrustworthy, problems, issues. Now, that's okay if you're looking for security threats, right? Like if you
Yeah.
are maybe in areas of the military, if you're in areas of cybersecurity, risk management, maybe some sorts of health and safety. If it's managed effectively, there are all sorts of roles where if you're looking for stuff that goes wrong, there are places that things go wrong and things that can be fixed. So that's a good example of
Mm-hmm.
channeling it effectively. Like if you're constantly paranoid that your colleagues are plotting against you, that's going to be an issue. But if
Mm-hmm.
you work in national security and you're worried that there's these plots in the world that people want to cause harm, that exists, right? That's a job. There's a job description around that. You structure that around cybersecurity or national defense
Yeah.
or, company security. There's all sorts of places where asking really, really pointed, difficult questions, if they're targeted in the right direction, is a very useful job.
Got it. And then I think you mentioned that there were three, right?
Yeah, so there's three clusters, and I've got about 11 kind of prototypes, styles that I won't go over them all, but I can give a few examples of each in different clusters. Those are in the same kind of eccentric kind of
Okay.
cluster.
Got it.
But then the kind of traditional one that people kind of associate with the dark side is the more destructive one. So these are, people that can sometimes be referred to as like narcissists, histrionic, antisocial. But those are the kind of more outward looking, aggressive kind of traits where people tend to want to manage other people, manage relationships, and control social situations. Like first cluster I talked about are very kind of standoffish, more avoidant when it comes to that. But
Yeah.
we can look at the subclinical elements of that. Like if you look at the kind of normal range of like risk-taking, thrill-seeking behavior, it's not necessarily psychopathic, but it's people who aggressively like to take risks, who like to be in a bit of danger, who like a bit of conflict and enjoy that. That
Yeah.
can work in some situations, right? Like again, it's one of those where you need really specific guardrails. Like if we just look at,
Yeah. Gotta be
financial
careful.
sector, banking,
Yeah.
right? Like risk taking, depending on what kind of risks you take, fine. But if you give people no structure, no direction, no regulation, no rules, the kind of risks that people take will be just off the charts sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and the people that like to take those risks and like those kind of environments will gravitate towards them, right? So they will find potentially the least regulated, the environments that give them the most power and the most flexibility to use that power. So if you have kind of
Mm-hmm.
workplaces where there's a lot of control, you have a lot of opportunity to influence other people, they need more structure around them because the people who will be attracted to wielding that kind of power might use it for their own purposes or for kind of less constructive purposes. So, in that
Mm-hmm.
example, if you're channeling people in the right direction, like even like kind of everyday positions like sales or business development, right? You're
Yeah.
kind of in a very outward focused role where you have to be having conversations with all sorts of people. You might have to manage the conversation, manage the relationship, be slightly
Mm-hmm.
dominant when it comes to putting across your point of view, sharing your message. If you're trying to win
Yeah.
clients, win customers, you need a bit of that, but you also need some constraints within that because you need to go back to the company and say, okay, here's what I promised. Some of it
Yeah.
we actually have to do. So you need to be able to maintain those relationships with the people who are delivering those products in the company, building the products in the company, or managing that. So those kind of guardrails are useful.
God. Yeah. Okay. Great. Yeah. So like you mentioned that like you have more prototypes, but obviously we can't go through all of them because like we only have
Yeah.
so much time together, right? But we will link all of that down below because that's extremely important, right? So the ones that you went over right now was like solitary, right? Which
Yep.
many people can definitely connect with. Like they don't really take feedback
Mm-hmm.
that well. They kind of tend to be a bit different. They're a bit more like eccentric, as you mentioned, and technical roles, which kind of help them be independent and just kind of operate on their own, they tend to be really, really good at that, right? And then if you have people that are quite paranoid, putting them in situations where they're on the lookout and they have to look for certain threats in different industries, they tend to be really good in there because again, they're wired for it. And then we talked
Mm-hmm.
about the ones where they're extremely like high energy, they take a lot of risk, they tend to like chaos. Obviously, this is a really interesting personality type because again, it can go in either direction, right? Because again,
Yep.
most of the time this tends to be really helpful in places like entrepreneurship, like where you need that like a bit of craziness, right? And like
Yep.
like you have to be assertive, but again, you have to make sure that you don't cross certain lines, because again, it can lead to horrible things, right? So that's really interesting when it comes down to personality.